Tom Foley, Premier Congressman for the Northwest, is our guest today. He is the House Whip and probably soon to become Majority Leader of the House of Representatives when Congress reconvenes in November. Tom serves as Vice Chairman of the House Committee on Agriculture and Chairman of the Subcommittee of Wheat, Soybeans, and Feed Grains. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Nice to be here.
I think a lot of people are curious as to the difference. We've all heard about the House Whip and the Majority Leader and the Speaker. But would you please differentiate those jobs and some of the personality characteristics that you think are incumbent to each of those jobs?
That's a good question. The Speaker, of course, is the constitutional officer that presides over the House, and he's elected by all the House members. Doesn't have to be a member of the House, actually. And
really?
Though historically we've never had a Speaker who hasn't been a House member.
You mean somebody on the street could be?
The House could elect a former president or elect a distinguished former public official or anyone that they chose to elect. But historically, all speakers have been members of the House. Each party has a majority leader or leader. In the Republican Party, it's Bob Michel of Illinois, and on the Democratic side, it's Jim Wright. Tip O'Neill is the Speaker. He's leaving this year, and this will be his last year in the Congress. And in December, when the party meetings, both Republican and Democratic, gather, I think Jim Wright will be elected Speaker, and I'm going to run for Majority Leader. The Majority Leader's job is to be the leader of the party in the House and to speak quite a bit on party and also on general issues on the floor, and to schedule in consultation with other members of the leadership to schedule bills for floor action. That's one of the principal responsibilities of the Majority Leader. The Whip is really the Assistant Majority Leader, or in the case of the Republican Whip, the Assistant Minority or Republican Leader. And the Whips kind of keep tabs on how the members feel about issues. It's a sensitive sort of job where you're trying to find out in advance how members might vote, not to affect the outcome as much sometimes as just to determine whether amendments need to be added or whether a bill needs to go back to committee and be reworked, or how the members in general feel about an issue. The personality requirements, the Speaker, I suppose, needs to be, first of all, fair, because when he presides over the House, even though he's the leader of his own party, he has to be impartial in the judgments and rulings that he gives to the House, so he commands the respect of all the members. We've only had, in the time I've been in Congress, maybe a handful of cases where anybody moved to appeal the ruling of the chair. The decision has to be seen as fair. On the other hand, the Speaker off the chair or out of the chair is the party leader in this country, and it's the one thing in the Congress, the one election that we go through, probably of all the votes that are taken, that's a party line vote. When you elect a Speaker, you really declare which party you want to belong to. And so the Republican leader is pretty much the heir apparent if the Republicans take majority in the House, and the Democratic leader, the Majority Leader, is the heir apparent to the speakership. So I'm going to try to be the Majority Leader and when the Majority Leader becomes the Speaker this year.
And the personality characteristics, are they different for each
of those jobs?
They're
different for each individual. I don't think there's any really standard personality characteristic that goes with a job. I've seen different types of people become Republican leaders and whips and Democratic leaders and whips. My own view, personally, is that the best partisanship is not a raucous kind of narrow partisanship. The best party leaders, I think, are open and reasonable and try to develop a cooperative spirit not only among the members of their own party but sometimes the members of the opposition party. Bob Michel, the Republican leader, is, for example, very widely admired for being a very highly respected and open and conscientious person. I think Jim Wright is considered the same way. I hope I have that reputation with Republicans as well as Democrats in the House. You have to do a lot of consultation in a modern congressional leadership position. You have to consider the views of individual members from different parts of the country, of different philosophical persuasions. There isn't any kind of dictation of the members in our system. In the British Parliament, in the French National Assembly, leaders of parties often are quite strict in enforcing, on certain issues at least, the compliance of their members. That's not true in our case.
We'll be right back, and we'll talk about the new tax bill. My guest is Tom Foley, Congressman from the 5th District, who is serving his 11th term and soon probably to become the House Majority Leader. The tax bill, by gosh, it looks like we got one.
I think so. This is going to be an interesting bill. It's the most fundamental tax reform in the last 50 years. And there are pluses and minuses. Obviously, we're disappointed in this state that we didn't get deductibility of the sales tax. There will be people concerned about the elimination of the investment tax credits, other changes in the bill, deductions that aren't available anymore. But the most important thing, you think of, the tax rates are coming down dramatically. The 28% represents a very dramatic drop from the 50% maximum tax rate of the bill, and it transfers taxes from individuals to corporations. Some would argue you can't do that, but that's the intent of the bill. And it's designed to produce the same amount of revenue, not to raise or lower the total revenue receipts of the government. It will be obviously a powerful impact on investment patterns and individual financial choices of millions of Americans and companies, and one would hope that it will move in the direction of making taxes fairer and encouraging people to feel that they can keep more of what they earn, and also maybe making investment decisions more in an economic context than sometimes has been done because of tax consequences.
When we were speaking beforehand, I was voicing concern that maybe this tax bill will not be the panacea that everyone thinks. For instance, most of the shelters, most of the loopholes are there for a reason.
Right.
The oil
Right.
loophole, because we didn't want to be dependent on foreign
Right.
oil. Tax shelters, because we wanted to encourage certain kinds of investment, especially the low-income investment, housing for low income,
right.
so on. Do you think we're actually going to end up in a bigger mess of soup than we started out with?
I think there'll be some problems with this bill that will show up fairly soon, and it will probably be in a year or two a suggestion that some will make that we ought to change the bill in some degree. And I think some of the changes, some of the effects of the bill won't be easily foreseen for perhaps 2 or 3 years. No doubt what you say is true, that there were investment opportunities that also met social purposes. In a way, this bill represents a backtracking away from the tax code as a method of encouraging good social changes.
So this is a rather Republican bill then?
Well, in that sense, it's a conservative bill, in the sense that it makes the tax code less of an instrument for social change than it was before. When we wanted to encourage low-income housing, we gave tax credits and tax benefits to people who invested in low-income housing. We wanted to encourage oil production, we gave incentives to oil producers and exploration. Some of those things remain in the bill, but the bill moves more toward a more, I would say, classic tax system, less of a social instrument than it was formerly. And there'll be some disadvantages to that. On the other hand, the bill strikes 6 million people from the tax rolls entirely, low-income people. It has 2 tax rates, a much simplified tax system. It probably just discourages some of the elaborate tax shelters because it reduces the rates from 50% to 28%, and it makes certain types of tax shelters illegal that were formerly possible. And while there were many good things that tax shelters accomplished, sometimes tax shelters produced distortions in the economy. We got an awful lot of warehouses that perhaps didn't need to be built. We had certain types of office building construction that was perhaps way beyond what was needed because the tax shelters encouraged that. But no tax bill is perfect, and I don't know whether it was Samuel Johnson or somebody said, to tax and to please no more than to love and to be wise is given to humankind. So we'll find out the deficiencies of this tax bill pretty soon, and I predict it won't be the last tax bill that Congress will pass.
What happens to charities and the home mortgage interest and interest? What happens to those sacred cows?
The sacred cows of the home mortgage deduction are retained both for a principal residence and a second residence or vacation home. Those are fully protected. Deductions for other kinds of interest are limited. For example, you can't deduct automobile car payment interest anymore or credit card interest.
Isn't that going to kill the auto industry?
Well, it's going to affect them. And recent sharp reductions in interest rates by automobile financing companies probably reflect this concern. You're not going to be able to borrow against home equity except for certain limited purposes such as the education of children or medical costs and so on. But the basic home mortgage is protected. The IRAs, the individual retirement accounts, have been limited under the bill to certain income levels. The marriage deduction, special marriage deduction, has been eliminated. There are some deductions that have been very popular that have been stricken from this bill. But on the other hand, it's important to remember again that the tax rates have been brought down. And for many taxpayers, the loss of the deduction will be more than compensated by the lower rates. There will be some taxpayers, a few, that will have their taxes marginally increased by the bill. Not sharply, I don't think, for many, but for some there will be, as they say, tax losers as well as tax winners in this bill.
Will there be any capital gains?
There will be no more capital gains for individuals. The tax rate, the maximum tax rate under capital gains was 20% tax. Now the maximum tax is 28%, which is a little higher, but we don't have a holding requirement. You used to have to hold the stock for 6 months before it became a long-term capital gain and was eligible for the 20% maximum level. Now you can transact a tax or a stock sale overnight and you would still not be paying more than 28%. You asked about charitable contributions. For those who itemize their taxes, it will still be possible to deduct for charitable contributions, but for those who do not itemize, there will not be a provision, special provision for charitable deductions.
We'll be right back and we'll talk about the state of agriculture in this country. Tom Foley, Whip of the House of Representatives, is my guest, and a gentleman who's probably going to become the majority leader of the House. Agriculture is so vitally important to this area. What is happening in the world of agriculture?
Well, agriculture is having some difficult times. Land values have fallen. Farmers have been afflicted by very low prices for a number of years. Our exports have fallen off. A lot of very unfortunate things have occurred in the last 5 years. Most of it because of conditions outside the country, political upheavals, the economic troubles of the third world countries, the credit problems of many of our former customers, to some extent the problems with our currency, first being very strong and making our prices to our customers very high and discouraging sales. Now it's an adjustment period where the currency values are weakening, and that's helpful in the long run, but hasn't fully taken effect yet. I think, and I hope this is right, that we're seeing the beginning of the end of this very serious recession in agriculture that's plagued us for the last 5 years. It's such an important industry, not only for this region, but for the whole country, that it would be a long-term serious drag on our whole national economy if agriculture doesn't find a recovery soon. And I think it's important that we keep an active export role in agriculture. The United States has been a major exporter of agricultural products, and this area sends 80% of its wheat, for example, into export. So the export market is extremely important. It's coming back slowly. I would like to see a steady recovery over the next 3 or 4 years. I'm not sure we're going to get back quickly to those terrific days in the 70s where 3 out of 4 bushels of wheat that were newly grown and sold in the world came from the United States. But I hope to see us begin a recovery here soon.
Let's change the subject to nuclear waste. You've studied this, obviously. Do you have a solution as to what we in this country should do about our nuclear waste problem?
Well, I think there's a a law in place which we in the Northwest are not objecting to in principle. What we object to very strongly is the way the law has been implemented by the Department of Energy. We feel it's been implemented unfairly and that it has selected Hanford as one of the 3 sites to be studied for disposal of high-level nuclear wastes without adhering to the proper provisions of the bill and the law, and in effect postponing indefinitely a 2nd site that was supposed to be located east in the eastern part of the United States. So as a delegation of Republicans and Democrats from Washington, joined by many of our colleagues from the Northwest, we're very bitterly opposed to the present process that's focusing on 3 sites. A place called Smith County in Texas, a nuclear test site in Nevada, and the Hanford Reservation in Washington. And we've utilized every effort inside Congress and with the association with the governor and the state officials to try and get the selection process back on the track that Congress designed it. There has to be a disposal of these nuclear wastes. They exist. They have to be placed somewhere, but we want to insist that they're placed somewhere where the ecological and scientific circumstances are appropriate, and not to have them placed some location, particularly in the state of Washington, because the Department of Energy believes that it's more politically acceptable to the immediate area around which the disposal site would be placed. That fight is going to go on. We're just at the beginning of it.
The beginning. Yeah. We'll be right back, and we'll talk about the Democratic Party. Congressman Tom Foley is my guest, and we would wager to bet the next majority leader of the House of Representatives. Don't want to jinx you, but I think that's a safe bet.
Thank you.
Who and what are the Democratic Party?
Well, the Democrats, of course, are the oldest political party in the country. We're about 150 years old. In fact, I think the Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the Western world. I don't think any party in Europe can trace its history as far as the Democrats have. Part of a great 2-party system in this country. Obviously, we have a different sort of party structure in the United States because we have Democrats that are more conservative than many Republicans, and some Republicans that are more moderate or liberal, whatever you want to call it, than many Democrats. So it isn't the kind of perfect philosophical alignment that many European parties would say. I think Democrats over the years have prided themselves, however, on being a national party, on being a party that represents the interests of all regions of the country, that they have focused particularly on people that are, I would say, middle income, middle class people, as well as those who are more economically disadvantaged. While we don't think as a party that any income level is disadvantaged or unresponsive to our party interests, I think the big focus in the Democratic Party today is that hard-working center of the country that works hard, very often in 2 family earners, is anxious to improve their economic condition, and is really the backbone of the economy. I think it's a party that pays a lot of attention to farmers and the concerns of farmers. It's hard to generalize perfectly, but I think the image of the Democratic Party, and that's kind of a word we use these days, has been a little bit away from the reality. Sometimes the most vocal voices in a party don't represent the broad cross-section of the party interest. We're a party committed to peace and to arms control and to the concerns for the disadvantaged communities in our country that have been hardest hit. But we're also a party that's interested in the mainstream of our national life and in all segments of our society, and working together to, I think we're a party that's very much devoted now to economic growth.
Is the old Democratic Party of John Kennedy, Speaker Rayburn, is that still around?
Some of it's still around, a lot of it's still around. I don't find many things in the philosophy of John Kennedy that are alien to me. I think in some degree the party today is finds great comfort with the ideals and attitudes of John Kennedy. We're a party that traditionally grew up out of the rural South and the major eastern cities and the western plains, and parties that link different geographic areas and to some extent different economic groups in a coalition of concerns. The Rooseveltarian coalition of the Democratic Party, for example, has been altered, but it still represents a reality of concern. And because the party is so broad in its geographic and kind of demographic focus, it would probably be, as Speaker O'Neill has said a number of times, 5 parties if it were in Europe. It would have a liberal wing, it would have moderate wings, and it would have a conservative wing. All of those are kind of grouped together under one party ideal, and if I had to say what is central to it, I think today it's an interest in having a strong national defense, but also a commitment to peace and to arms control as the first objectives of the country.
Okay.
Fairness.
May I interrupt?
Okay.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Yeah.
Let me just get fairness in and in our national life.
Well, I thank you for joining us. It's been most informative. Thank you for joining us on Talk It Over.